You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
The world's gone mad. This is the Free Stater. True conservatism, constitutionalism, may be in the minority now when it comes to the dialogue on political affiliation, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting. We fight for principles over party, values over politicians, and truth over feelings. You've entered a state of freedom. This is the Free Stater. Paul Lombardo hadn't planned on a 3-decade detour when he stopped at a Greasy Spoon restaurant for breakfast in February 1980. Lombardo, then a graduate student at the University of Virginia, picked up a newspaper, read, and ate his bacon and eggs. The rest is history, literally and figuratively. For almost 30 years, Lombardo has tried to uncover the full story of the wrongs that he read about on that day. This from an article from USA Today by Andrea Pitzer. The article, U.S. Eugenics Legacy, Ruling on Buck Sterilization Still Stands. The article he had stumbled across was about two sisters sterilized in the 1920s by the state of Virginia for being, quote, feeble-minded. The younger sister hadn't even known she had tubal ligation. She didn't learn until she was in her late 60s that the surgery wasn't for appendicitis. And now the older, more famous sister, Carrie Buck, was the subject of the now infamous lawsuit over the legality of the operation. Buck versus Bell. That was decided by the United States Supreme Court. He read that although Carrie Buck was the first victim of a 1924 sterilization law, 8,300 Virginians had involuntarily been sterilized until the practice was stopped in the 1970s. The law itself was repealed in 1974. My goodness. That long. It was startling, said Lombardo, 59, now a legal historian at Georgia State University in Atlanta. He didn't know of eugenics, this quote-unquote science of human improvement through controlled breeding, as more than a vague concept. Learning that there had been many eugenic programs in the United States in the 20th century and that the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in favor of Buck's sterilization, it amazed him. And you know what? To this day even, the thought of that amazes me. As long ago as that was, it was the 1920s. It's 2017. We're coming up on almost 100 years ago on that. And it's still mind-boggling. The idea of eugenics I fear, among millennials is becoming more and more of a legitimate direction for mankind to go down. It's terrifying. You see it all over the place. I'm in this supposedly quote-unquote conservative group where self-proclaimed conservatives are talking about how good of an idea eugenics is. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. It's evil. And another thing that's gaining support from secular society, from the rest of the world, is this idea of euthanasia and child euthanasia.
And I think that if I were a mother of a suffering child, I would be the first to want, a deeply suffering child, I would be the first to want to put a pillow over its face.
Dr. Peter Evans
as I would with any suffering thing. And I think the difference is that my feeling of horror at suffering is much greater than my feeling of getting rid of a couple of cells, because suffering can go on for years.
I'm sorry, I was just about to introduce another guest there, but that's a pretty horrifying thing to say, that you would put a pillow over.
Of course I would, if it was a child I really loved who was in agony. I think any good mother would.
That's going to cause some shock amongst people.
I don't know any mother who wouldn't say that if there was nothing else that could be done, and
that's
it was
just not true. Do you think that mothers would agree with you?
I think a lot would. Maybe not any, but a lot.
Yeah, I found that video clip on YouTube, and the truly disturbing thing to me is that a lot of the YouTube comments on that video are in support of what that woman said. Not all, but you have one comment that has the audacity to say that what this woman just said is honest. What this woman just said is decent. This world doesn't know what decency is. The woman's name, Virginia Ironside. She's a British journalist and author. If you had any desire to look her up or to look her articles up, I honestly don't. That's a mother. That's a mother saying that she would be willing to put a pillow over her child's face. That's the thing about this society today, is we are so afraid. We are so afraid of suffering, or the idea of suffering, that we've gotten to the point where we value death over life. Back to the USA Today article. The Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote in the 1927 ruling, quote, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." This woman, Lombardo says, got railroaded, and one of the giants of the Supreme Court was driving the train. In the years that followed, Lombardo's PhD dissertation focused on the attorney who fought to have Buck sterilized. In 1985, he published more research in the New York University Law Review, saying that the key facts of the Buck case were simply not true, and that Buck never received any real legal representation. He has written journal articles and made many speeches on the subject, finding himself returning to the details of the story over and over again. The case was, as he says, quote, "part of my intellectual life for so long that in some senses it was my hobby is not the right word. It was obsession would probably be closer," Lombardo said. Last fall, his book, 3 Generations, No Imbeciles, was published. In February, he traveled to Rome to speak on the danger of eugenics at the Vatican Conference. He is working on a book titled 100 Years of Eugenics, from the Indiana experiment to the Human Genome Project. Lombardo has no plans to abandon his fight to publicize the terrible history of eugenics, with genetics playing an increasingly important role in science. Lombardo and other bioethicists fear the lessons of eugenics debacle matter more than ever. The University of Maryland historian Stephen Selden worries about how we will handle the ethical questions of possible genetic improvements to humanity. Quote, "We're going to revisit all of the ethical conundrums that were inherent in the eugenics movement as we move forward." The story of Carrie Buck. Buck was born and raised in Charlottesville, became pregnant near her 17th birthday. Her foster parents had her institutionalized as a feeble-minded moral delinquent, despite her claims that she had been assaulted by their nephew. When she gave birth, her child was given to her foster parents, who adopted her, and Buck was sent to the Virginia State Colony for epileptics and feeble-minded in Lynchburg. Buck's mother had already been committed to the colony. With 3 generations available for examination, colony superintendent Albert Priddy felt confident that he could prove the Buck women were defective. He sought to have Carrie Buck sterilized under Virginia's new law authorizing surgery on epileptics, the feeble-minded, imbeciles, and the socially inadequate. That's such a terrifying paragraph to read. We continue. The case went to court, and as it worked its way through the legal system, Priddy died and John Bell took his place at the colony. And by virtue of his new position, Bell became the official defendant in the case known thereafter as Buck versus Bell. Aubrey Strode, the legislator who had written the Virginia law, became the lawyer representing the colony in the fight to sterilize Buck. Strode and Buck's appointed attorney, Irving Whitehead, were childhood friends. Whitehead, a longtime supporter of sterilization, had been a founding director of the Virginia colony. Even for a small town half a century ago, the connections felt suspect to Lombardo. The whole process from Buck's institutionalization to the Supreme Court decision that the state could legally sterilize her seemed cruel and arbitrary to him. Buck was indeed sterilized after the High Court's ruling and was later paroled from the colony. In his research, Lombardo found report cards for Carrie and her daughter, Vivian. Buck had been passed on each year with very good marks in deportment and lessons. Vivian had made the honor roll, and there was nothing to suggest any mental deficiency in either of them. The child died at age 8 from measles and intestinal infection. Buck versus Bell has never been overturned. And though he hadn't discovered Carrie Buck or eugenics before living in Charlottesville, Lombardo had inadvertently landed in the perfect place to study both. Bastions of eugenics lay farther north in New York and Massachusetts, but Virginia and its university had their own deep ties to the movement, which aimed to improve the human race like a livestock, or as much as the livestock is bred. Eugenic schemes included immigration restriction, laws against interracial marriage, and sterilization of those considered defective. In all, more than 30 states passed legislation supporting sterilization as part of a eugenic program. The official numbers of surgeries exceed 65,000, and targeted groups included, as they did in the state of Virginia, epileptics, the quote-unquote feeble-minded, the quote-unquote imbeciles, the quote-unquote socially inadequate. Nazis on trial at Nuremberg after World War II cited the influence of American eugenics programs on their policies and mentioned Buck versus Bell in their testimony. The passion for eugenics faded after the war as news of the Nazi atrocities came to light, but sterilization is still proposed from time to time as a remedy to a social problem. Lombardo met Buck shortly before her death in 1983 at the age of 76. She was living in a residence for poor senior citizens in Waynesboro, and Lombardo found her sitting frail and hunched over in a wheelchair. He talked with her for a bit and then asked if it were true that she'd been assaulted. She said yes, and then she confirmed that she had gone to school and had been promoted through several grades. Lombardo asked about her sister, Doris, who had recently died. He didn't feel comfortable going much further. He said she was happy to have a visitor. It was clear, though, that she still felt the shame. What was done to her affected her in a bad way her whole life. In 2002, the Virginia legislature passed a resolution specifically recognizing the mistreatment of Carrie Buck. And that year, Lombardo paid more than $1,200 for the passing of a historical marker in front of Charlottesville Community Center to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Buck versus Bell. The infamous state colony for epileptics and feeble-minded underwent several name and mission changes in the years after Carrie Buck was released. It is now called the Central Virginia Training Center. But Lombardo is not optimistic that most Americans will remember the Carrie Buck story. Historian Selden hopes they do. He says the moral issues do not go away. They get transformed, they change, but they come back to us again. Carrie and Vivian are buried in Charlottesville Oakwood Cemetery. Vivian next to her adoptive parents, who reported on her death certificate that they did not know the name of her birth mother. There, ladies and gentlemen, is a story of the state determining who was fit. And today, in 2017, we have a similar situation going on. The Ziegler boys. Child Protective Services in Oregon are saying that Eric and Amy are not intelligent enough to raise their two boys. This is from the Bringing Ziegler Boys Home GoFundMe page. Quote, where is the measurement for intelligent enough? Who decides that? Where are the guidelines? We can't find them, and they can't provide them. Almost 4 years ago, they took their son Christopher, less than 1 week old, because someone notified Child Protective Services in Bend, Oregon with information that was not accurate. The claim turned out that there was no abuse, no neglect, nothing. Except that the state is now saying that the couple is not intelligent enough to raise their children. The couple disagrees, and so do I. They've been fighting ever since to get Christopher back, and then, this year, in February 2017, they gave birth to another son, Hunter, and at 2 days old, Child Protective Services came into the hospital and removed them from their mother and father's care. This family continues the battle to get their boys back in a small town where all the lawyers, judges, and Child Protective Services workers know one another. The parents do not have a fighting chance without a lawyer coming in from a different area. We're urging and pleading with anybody and everybody to please help us get Christopher and Hunter back home to their parents. This is a matter of where our souls are. This is a matter of individual liberty. Do you value liberty? I want to quote a man I really, really respect, Mr. Glenn Beck. We do not do this to each other. We do not let our government do this. People need to pay attention to this story, because this violation of human rights will only continue in the future. Amy's plight is your plight. If you don't stand up for Amy, You could be the next Amy. Amy Fabrini said in an interview, CPS took him right from the hospital. I didn't even get to bring him home. According to Oregon Live, the state argued in court documents that both parents had limited cognitive abilities that interfere with their ability to safely parent the child. Shireen Hagenbach, a professional mediator and a volunteer who oversaw visits with Fabrini and Eric Ziegler, the parents and their children, said their home was a loving environment and that the children should be with their parents. The two, Hagenbach and Fabrini, said that the case started when Fabrini and Ziegler's former roommate filed a complaint that Ziegler was neglecting Christopher. Fabrini's father also filed a complaint, but they disputed the claims. Hagenbach said Fabrini's father was mad that Fabrini moved in with Ziegler. The couple, this is just insane. This is just madness. The sad thing is it's really not getting, as far as I can tell, it's really not getting a lot of press. It's really not getting a lot of publicity even from conservatives. This is a violation of human rights. This is a violation of liberty. Where's the outrage? Where's the outrage? You're telling me that the government can just come in and decide you're unfit to be a parent. You're not smart enough to be a parent. Your IQ isn't high enough to be a parent. According to Oregon Live, the couple, their IQ is about 72 and 66. Fabrini's is 72, Ziegler's is 66. The average IQ is between 90 and 110. The couple lives in a home owned by Ziegler's parents, and both have earned school diplomas. They've taken classes on parenting, first aid, CPR, nutrition since the case began. Fabrini also has twins from her previous marriage. She was granted joint custody of the twins after a divorce, but now they live with their father. Citing state and federal confidentiality laws, a spokeswoman for Oregon's Department of Human Services declined to comment to the Blaze on Fabrini and Ziegler's case. Asked if a parent's intellectual disability is enough to have a child removed from their home in Oregon, the spokeswoman said no, emphasizing that she was speaking in general and not in regard to Fabrini and Ziegler. So one of the comments on the Blaze article makes a great point by Tammy Smith. Here's the root issue behind this story and countless others like it. I don't think it's the root issue. I think the root issue is that we have a big intrusive government deciding who can and can't be parents, who is and isn't fit, who is and isn't smart enough. But she makes a good point. Anyone with a vengeful hate toward any coworker, family member, neighbor, anyone can call and make a complaint against them about their children. No real evidence and an investigation has to be opened. And this is one very messed up system. She makes a good point there. Here's another point that goes on top of that. Title IX in campus SJWs. All they have to do. This from a Reddit post that was published about 3 months ago by Torkin Thunder. Yes, I know, we're trying to read some insight from Torkin Thunder. Let's see what he has to say. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 is a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any education program or activity that receives federal funding. Under Title IX, discrimination on the basis of sex can include sexual harassment, rape, and sexual assault. A college or university that receives federal funds may be held legally responsible when it knows about and ignores sexual harassment or assault in its programs or activities. The school can be held responsible in court whether the harassment is committed by a faculty member, staff, or a student. In some cases, the school must pay the victim money damages. Now that this is explained, it sounds great, right? I don't think anyone has a problem with any law like this to be in place. What actually happens in practice is nothing short of disturbing some of the time. Again, this is a quote from Torque and Thunder. I'm gonna put a link probably up on Twitter and let you read it. Most of his sources, as far as I can tell, came from the National Review and Reason.com. Great websites, by the way. What actually happens in practice is nothing short of disturbing some of the time. If you've ever heard a story of what happened at Amherst in 2012, or as recently as the suicide of Thomas Locke, I think his name is, you'll instantly know why I make this claim. How, in any case, does it make sense to not let someone defend themselves just on what sometimes is nothing more than a claim? You can't even face your accuser in these campus courts. You can't even defend yourself in some of these campuses. It's no secret how much of these courts are stacked in favor of the accuser, or sometimes not even that, just against the male. How can anyone view this as even lawful? What should be in place to actually help rape victims or those of sexual assault is more in effect just to go after the male students as if filling out some kind of Title IX quota. Quote unquote from Torque and Thunder on Change My View board on Reddit. In short, your life could be ruined if you make someone mad and they make a claim against you. Your life could be ruined. We live in such a corrupt, twisted society. I mean, we already know that. There's really no need to go deeper into that. It's just the way things are now. We live in a corrupt, twisted society. And I shouldn't even say now, I'm sure. I mean, look at what happened with the Buck case. It's always been this way. It's always been this way. Why do we tolerate it? Where is the outrage for things like this? Why do we tolerate it? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me why conservatives... I gotta be careful. It doesn't make sense to me why there isn't more outrage on the conservative side. Yes, we talk about how bad it is on Facebook or Twitter. But, man, it's just evil. It's just evil. If you're able to help the Fabrini and Ziegler family, go to GoFundMe.com and look up Bringing the Ziegler Boys Home. They have $32,745 of their $30,000 goal. Encourage you to share it around. We stand for liberty on this show. As conservatives, as constitutionalists, we stand for liberty. No exceptions.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Hey, it's Ian Ballinger from the Free Stater here on the Lanterns Radio Network. Now, most people listen to the show when it goes up every Friday at 7 p.m. Central Time on Spreaker, SoundCloud, YouTube, or even on your iPhone podcast app. But you can also listen to the show over at lanterns.buzz. That's lanterns.buzz, where the show plays on replay every weekday and weekend at 11 a.m. Central Time. Every day throughout the week, you can listen to the replay of the show on the lanterns.buzz radio stream. Aha! 11 a.m. Central Time and 3 a.m. in the morning. Just fantastic times. If you're driving out late, you can listen to the show. And if you're waking up in the morning, driving to work, going to lunch during work, whatever, Show's available for you to listen to right there on replay. That's lanterns.buzz. And while you're over there, I encourage you to check out some of the other great shows that the Lanterns Radio Network has to offer. You've got Bells of Liberty, Todd Huff Radio, Battle for Freedom, Patriot Politics, Defenders of American Exceptionalism, The HoloNet, Fires of Liberty, Battlefield Live, The Conservative Syndicate, and many other special programs. You may have heard back during CPAC even, they did a huge live stream, continuous coverage of CPAC. Go to lanterns.buzz for great content. We're here to fix the machine. Lanterns.buzz.
Welcome, Kmart shoppers. Kmart has low discount prescription prices. Visit our pharmacist today and compare our prices to what you're presently paying elsewhere.
You'll be glad you did.
Alright, so I want to get to this fun thing after we just had a heavy last segment. You just keep that family in your prayers. And if you can, share that GoFundMe page. Bring the Ziegler boys home. Share it around if you're not able to donate. If you're able to donate, please do so. Before we get to this awesome highlight video from SJW Central on YouTube, Campus Reform posted this article that just left me honestly speechless. I don't even know what to say at this point. This from Campus Reform by Tony Erikssonen. Probably pronounced your name wrong, Tony, but if I did, I'm sorry. If not, also sorry. Her name is spelled, and this is her Twitter handle, so if you want to support her, go follow her on Twitter and share the Campus Reform article around. The ID number for the article is 9538, so if you're able to, on your social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, share this article around, because this is insanity. Anyway, the author's name is TONI_AIRAKSINEN. Go follow her and read her article. The new director of Multicultural Student Affairs at North Carolina State University recently pledged to create a segregated housing option for women of color only. Oh! So the campus left wants to bring back segregation. Oh! Oh my goodness gracious. Wittenberg explained her position. The point and purpose is, if you're a Latina and you are an engineering major with a very specific specialization, you may not ever see anybody who looks like you. But when you come home, here is your opportunity to get some support and deal with some of the microaggressions you might have had to deal with throughout your entire day when you've been at class. Oh my gosh, we are raising a generation of oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. What happened to the whole idea of judging people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin? What is this whole, you may not see somebody who looks like you? How is, oh my gosh. It leaves me speechless. I don't even know what to say. It's just insanity. The left is advocating for segregation. This is not the only example of this. I'll show you another article. The point and purpose is, if you're Latina, she says, you may not see somebody who likes or looks like you. So let's segregate you so you can be around people who look like you at the end of the day. What? North Carolina State already has 2 housing options for racial minorities, one exclusively for black males and one exclusively for Native American students. The school does not currently have one for female racial minority students, hence Wittenberg's proposal. The executive director of University Relations, Fred Hartman, told Campus Reform that North Carolina State has 16 different living and learning villages for students, and while he claimed that the applications for each one are open to any student, he did not answer whether an applicant's race would factor into admission decisions. We are living in, such a weird time. It's honestly unbelievable. We are living in a time where there are university administrators advocating for segregation. And by the campus left, they are being praised. What are we? Where? What timeline did we fall into? What reality are we living in? At Colorado University in Boulder, they're creating a special new residence hall that will segregate black people away from the general student population, according to dailycaller.com. One of these living and learning communities will be set aside exclusively for black identified students and their allies. Oh, okay, so if you just say, oh, we're just giving them this special space, it's okay then. We are losing our soul. Wow, I live in a time where society is just totally okay with this idea of segregation. Totally okay. As long as it's, hey, hold on. As long as it is the SJWs pushing it. As long as it's the SJWs pushing it. How about it's just evil, period, to separate people based on race? How about we judge people by the content of their character, by their merits, and not by the amount of melanin that they have in their skin? I need something to cool down. And what better way to cool down than watch the man himself, Ben Shapiro of the Daily Wire, absolutely destroy Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. Ben and Cenk had a debate at Politicon, and SJW Central, the YouTube channel SJW Central, compiled a video highlight reel of the best of the debate. Let's take a listen.
Something that is about equality of opportunity, and you cannot have equality of opportunity if you're dead.
Okay, so that's Cenk.
So
next guy is Mr. Shapiro, who, I've said it before and I'll say it again, one of the smartest conservatives alive today. He's a great guy. Go check him out over at dailywire.com.
Medicare for all.
Okay, go ahead. So a couple of notes in response to the Medicare for All shtick. So this is Bernie Sanders shtick, obviously. The problem with Medicare for All is that when people say that it's affordable, this isn't affordable to the person who has the Medicare. It is not affordable to the country. In fact, it is so unaffordable to the country that the state of California was a nut job leftist state, just refused to even pass Medicare for All because it would have immediately doubled the debt.
So when you say tax revenue is at its highest point, now you know that that's misleading because everything economically is at its highest point, meaning that we have a lot more people in the country than we did in the 1950s and 60s, so hence we are collecting more overall taxes. But the reality is, as a percentage, it is clearly down. The top bracket now is around 39%. It used to be at 91%. That's inarguable, right?
But our economy is significantly larger than it was then, and part of that is because of reductions in taxes over previous decades.
Well, the reason why when taxes are higher, it winds up being better for the economy is because it recirculates the money. So if you give it to the rich, this is hilarious. If you're uneducated, please at least don't make it obvious.
See, it's amazing. Cenk is just he's going to go and insult the crowd's education, and then when the crowd boos, he is all surprised. Oh, you're booing at me?
The Republican Party at this point is completely dependent on their donors. And by the way, don't get me wrong, the Democratic Party is also largely dependent on their donors. I think the Republicans are a tiny bit more corrupt. But so I think that their donors are going to demand those tax cuts. And if I am right, and we'll all see this, because it's something that's going to happen later, not something that has happened, they will do everything. They will move mountains to make sure that those rich donors and corporations will get their tax cuts.
Okay. So this is an interesting case where I say to Cenk's prognostication from his mouth to God's ears, and he says about mine from my mouth to God's ears, because I don't think they're going to pass anything, because I think that there's a high-level incompetence inside the Republican caucus, and it's pretty fractious. But I do want to go back to a couple of points, because you actually hit on some major thematic points. You talked about roads and the fact that we need roads in order to get to work. This is a point Elizabeth Warren made, and obviously a point that President Obama made at the time. I don't think anyone argues that we don't need roads to get to work. The problem is that when you're talking about roads as a percentage of the budget, we are talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the federal budget and of the state budget and even of the local budget. So the idea that you're justifying massive tax rates on corporations in order to pay for roads is just intellectually dishonest. It's a tiny the stuff that we agree on, that government should spend on, is a tiny percentage of spending, right? It's all the other stuff that we disagree on. As far as the idea that I'm somehow being, dismissive toward people who are buying hamburgers, I'm not. I'm saying the people who are poor need to buy hamburgers to feed their children. They don't have the money to invest in building an iPhone, because when you're just trying to get by and you are living in a Walmart subsistence economy, you're using that money to buy the products and services you need to get by. That does not create new products and services that become cheaper over time through competition. You need somebody to make those investments. You said this about Glass-Steagall, for example. You said the banks, they might make their own investments. In what? In what? They're not investing in themselves. I mean, they have to take that money and then they have to use it to invest in something else. Places like Apple, some that fail and some that succeed. This idea that banks are somehow evils is just not the case unless you are talking about them working in Congress. Here you and I agree, working in congruity with a Congress and with a legislature that is attempting to give them kickbacks. Both you and I agree on this. So, and finally, as far as the idea that Republicans pass tax cuts because they're beholden to their donors, okay, and Democrats pass tax increases because the unions give them hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and I don't see Democrats complain about this.
So, you got me there. The unions give money to the Democrats.
As far as the idea that all money should be out of politics, here's the problem. Okay, TYT, we both have corporations, and we expound upon politics every single day. And we motivate thousands of people, right, every day on both sides of the aisle. That is effectively an in-kind contribution. Now, you campaigned with Bernie Sanders. Did you do it because you expected? That's fine. Did you do that because you supported Bernie Sanders, or did you do that because you expected some gimme for TYT in return? I assume you did it because you supported Bernie Sanders, right?
Yes.
So, okay. So, the point that I am making is to attribute to everyone else bad intent when it comes to political spending in politics, but to yourself, it's totally fine. And when it comes to other media entities that give in-kind contributions on a regular basis through their coverage, this is when the New York Times, which is biased to the left, spends an inordinate amount of time and money reporting on Mitt Romney's idiotic stories about how he was in high school and cutting a gay kid's hair in 1932. If you're saying to me that that is less impactful on the political sphere than a corporation, which is a group giving money to a political candidate for purposes of supporting that candidate, I fail to see how you can say for yourself that you are innocent in this, but everyone else is guilty. I don't believe that. Either everyone's guilty or everybody is innocent, or if you can find the actual cases of guilt where there's a quid pro quo, then we agree. That's prosecutable, right? Yes. So, other point. When you talked about the 2008 economy, you talked about Glass-Steagall and how this led to the crash. The real reason that the crash happened had far less to do with Glass-Steagall. I opposed the bailouts, by the way. It had far less to do with Glass-Steagall than it had to do with the fact that the federal government was actively promulgating the notion that corporations should give subprime mortgages to people who are not qualified as people who could take out loans. This meant that, as you say, corporations are not inherently conservative, they're not inherently free market, they're inherently profit-driven. So if they felt that they could give a bunch of subprime mortgages and this would inflate the real estate prices, and if things went wrong, they just foreclose on the nearest house, and the market just keeps going up and up and up, and they can just, as you say, turn these into derivatives and sell them on the open market by pretending that these are all good loans because they have government backing, then of course you're going to get an inflated, overheated real estate market. But the question there is not the workings of the free market. It's the combination that you like in a mixed economy that I hate. Okay, I hate mixed economies in the sense that I don't believe that capitalism and socialism should be mixed, that corporatism is the solution. Okay, what you're talking about is corporatism. You're talking about Glass-Steagall, which freed the getting rid of Glass-Steagall. It freed the corporations to invest in a free market manner, but also they gave a bailout to all of these corporations by essentially incentivizing them to give a bunch of bad loans, knowing that if things went bad, then all the losses would be socialized. The problem there is not the free market. The problem there is a government that is acting as a backstop for bad decisions in the free market by profit-driven corporations.
Okay. All right, I love that. There's a lot to respond to there, so let me try to take it one at a time. So first off, I love the idea that the government made the banks do the subprime mortgages, and golly gee, the government twisted the bank's arm when they made billions upon billions of dollars. Oh man, don't make me make another billion. Don't make me make another billion. No, they did those. If they thought they were going to lose money off of it, they would have a fiduciary responsibility not to do it.
I agree.
Okay, it was. They were not forced to make billions of dollars. They were not forced to then have us bail them out. Right. They did all of that because there's legalized bribery in America.
Right, because the government was giving them money.
So now let me address that. You say, well, what's the difference between your speech and their speech? Mine is actually speech, and theirs is money. So there's a giant difference.
Now you spend money on your speech.
So first off. So they say, no, Supreme Court says, no, money is speech now. No, money is property. It's not speech. And so if money was speech, well, then if you go to a hooker and you say, oh, no, officer, I was just talking to her. Okay, money is not speech. So, for example, to give you a sense of it, to compare me saying I like Bernie Sanders and you saying whoever you like is the equivalent of this is obviously nonsensical. I believe it's obvious. So in a recent five-year period, the top 200 corporate givers, they both in donations and in lobbying spent $5.8 billion. Okay? So that is not the same thing as me saying, hey, I like what Bernie's saying about college and Medicare. And when they did, why do you think they did? It was not because, hey, they genuinely like Bernie or Trump or Hillary. Because in return for that $5.8 billion, they got $4.4 trillion in government subsidies. So, which leads to, I actually think, the biggest point here, the difference between big government and small government. So, a lot of times conservatives say, oh, you guys like big government. That's not true. So, let me explain. If I asked you, hey, you got a plumbing job, what would you like, big pipes or small pipes? I don't know. What's the job we have? It depends. It's the same thing with the government. Okay, what size government would you like? I don't know. What's the job we have? So to say big government or small government doesn't make any sense.
That's right.
So, for example, do I want a big government that invades Iraq? Hell no, I don't. No way. And Ben, you were vociferously for the Iraq War, so in that sense, you loved big government. Couldn't get enough of it. And I could go on and on and on. Republicans say, no, we don't like big government, but we'd like to be inside your uterus.
Which is untrue, and you can hear the crowds react. You hear the Young Turks crowd cheering, you hear some booing in the background. We only got a few minutes left, but I'll let Ben try to get his word in.
I need to respond to some of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to point out that Schenk's big government, small government dichotomy was proposed by you, not by me. I talk about the proper scope of the government's involvement in particular areas the same way that you do, and we may disagree on all of that. My point is that overall, if you're talking about the level of government spending, it needs to go down, and you believe that it really needs to go up. Okay, so it's disingenuous.
It depends. It's not on war, does it?
No, but overall...
Not on the war on drugs. Not on so many of those wasteful programs. It depends, but let me...
Overall, you want the federal budget increased. Overall, I would like the federal budget decreased. To pretend that this is not true is to lie. Okay, and when you suggest that there is no difference between, we just have different visions of what the government should cover, these things cost different things. Okay, the war in Iraq was very expensive. You know what's more expensive? Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. All of these are vastly more expensive than the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, as far as this, again, going back to this idea that, again, I don't like this big government dichotomy any more than you do, in the sense that you say, well, it's big government for the government to get inside people's wombs. And I say that it is the government's job to preserve life, liberty, and property, and one of those things is life. To protect you from someone else taking it. Okay? To protect you from someone else taking it.
Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I encourage you to go on YouTube and just look up Ben Shapiro Politicon Debate. It was an absolutely fantastic debate. I encourage you to go on Twitter and follow Lanterns Buzz. Follow me on Twitter at IanBallinger925. This is the Free Stater from the plains of the great state of Kansas here on the Lanterns Radio Network. Have a great week and God bless. Hey, it's Ian Ballinger from the Free Stater here on the Lanterns Radio Network. Now, most people listen to the show when it goes up every Friday at 7 p.m. Central Time on Spreaker, SoundCloud, YouTube, or even on your iPhone podcast app. But you can also listen to the show over at lanterns.buzz. That's lanterns.buzz, where the show plays on replay every weekday and weekend at 11 a.m. Central Time. Every day throughout the week, you can listen to the replay of the show on the lanterns.buzz radio stream. Aha! 11 a.m. Central Time and 3 a.m. in the morning. Just fantastic times. If you're driving out late, you can listen to the show. And if you're waking up in the morning, driving to work, going to lunch during work, whatever, show's available for you to listen to right there on replay. That's lanterns.buzz. And while you're over there, I encourage you to check out some of the other great shows that the Lanterns Radio Network has to offer. You've got Bells of Liberty, Todd Huff Radio, Battle for Freedom, Patriot Politics, Defenders of American Exceptionalism, The HoloNet, Fires of Liberty, Battlefield Live, The Conservative Syndicate, and many other special programs. You may have heard back during CPAC even, they did a huge live stream, continuous coverage of CPAC. Go to lanterns.buzz for great content. We're here to fix the machine. Lanterns.buzz.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz. For great radio, get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.